Welcome to the Sharpest College Football Podcast. This is our American Conference preview. This is BuckMetrics. You will note that not with me today is my usual co-host, Robert Martin. Robert is on assignment gathering information. He will report back next week in our next preview. But worry not, dear reader, listener, viewer. We have an amazing guest that's going to fill in more than amply for Robert. We have guesting for us today from the early read podcast, Reed Wallach. Reed, how are you?
I'm good. I'm pumped to be here, pumped for my own assignment on the podcast. So I'm pumped to be here, and it feels fitting. I feel like getting a G5 conference. I feel like that is a place where maybe I could provide some expertise, hopefully. So pumped to be on and pumped to dive into the American.
Likewise. And before we get into that, I just want to let people know I actually take pride in just crapping on a lot of national podcasts because they're stupid or very superficial. Honest to God, this preseason Reed's pod is the only one that I've been listening to for the conference previews. I would highly recommend it. It's a very good complement to this podcast. It's very sharp. There's a lot of coalescence in terms of where I've wound up with Reed and other conferences in terms of what we think are sharp plays in overs and unders. Reed gets a little more into the depth charts than I do. I'm more global with the numbers. So it's a really good complement. It's a good test of my theses. Reed is so sharp that not that he needs my approval, but if he wants to call his podcast also the Sharpest College Football Podcast, he more than has my permission.
Good. I'm glad I didn't have to file that with the trademark department. I'm glad I got your blessing. That's better that way. Keep the lawyers out of this.
Exactly. Keep it all friendly. So before we get to the American, I just wanted to, when you were doing in your Big Ten preview, I think it was, you mentioned Washington as a guest team, and that got me thinking about something I wanted to pick your brain about, just more in terms of just like theory here. Every preseason, there's a lot of teams where the market's just splitting the difference, if you will, on some unknown variables. Washington's an extreme example. You don't know how, new QB, new coach, new basically everything. And that's just a jumble of everythings, and they come to a 6.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to play that because you have no idea what's going to go on there. That's literally a guess. Taking that down to a little more precise level, I think when you've got teams that have one or two just variables that the market has to price in and we don't know, and they're splitting the difference, I call those price discovery plays because the market's just filling out, and I don't think they know. I think there's a wide variance of opinions there. I think that you can find typically some value in the season win total plays in those cases. An example that you had in the ACC was SMU, I think. I think that's a perfect example because we don't know if Preston Stone can really play at the Power 5 level. He stunk against the Power 5 last season, but my metrics actually have them, and I think you do too. I have them as the best team coming back to the ACC this season.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I would say, rating system smart people are very high on SMU, both numerically, or I should say quantitatively and qualitatively. And I
Yep.
think for good reason. I think that, yes, maybe the numbers won't capture preseason wise that they struggled against Power 5 teams, but this was a team that they put a hurt on the AAC. They were clearly the best team, and that's also
Yep.
with Preston Stone breaking his leg at the end of the year. So
Yep.
I think there is some guesswork there, especially with a team jumping leagues like that. So I could see maybe why SMU's number is a little inflated. I would say maybe they're not as good as their rating says there is. They have a lot of talent back. They have a lot of returning production. That's going to push them up the ladder. So I have manually in my head said, okay, they might be really good, but not as great as their numbers may say, because you need to
Mm-hmm.
adjust this new look that they're going to the ACC that your numbers may not be able to put into just yet. That being said, SMU is a really advantageous schedule. Granted, they're playing more Power 5 teams, but they have an advantageous schedule. You mentioned Washington, and that's a guest team for me because Washington's almost the complete opposite, right? They're moving leagues. You could argue they're moving up in league. They bring nobody back. They're amongst the bottom 5 teams in returning production. Their talent, while they may have talent, may be unfounded or it's not really put together just yet. So that's why
Yep.
Washington, to me, and you mentioned like win totals, and maybe I'm going on a tangent, but
No, go ahead, please.
win totals, all wins are into buckets, right? And there's different observations, right? Like Washington, I think now the win total is 6.5. So that's saying that it's somewhat likely that you're going to find yourselves in a band between, let's say, 5 to 8 wins, right? Plus or minus a few standard deviations. To me, that's a guess though. Like no one really 6.5 sure is like maybe the middle you would think, but there to me with certain teams, especially in Washington's case, there's a lot of downside risk to that. So I think you could argue that while you may be 5 to 8, those numbers aren't all created equal, right? I think that there might be more
Yep.
5 and 6 win seasons if you simulate the season 1,000 times versus 7 and 8 win seasons. I think like there's more avenues to struggles, and it's pretty easy to see that. I think with Washington's case, which I know it's an AAC pod, not a Big Ten pod, but I hope that example makes a little bit of sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I think I want to just take the inverse of that downside risk. And this is really where I'm going with this. And we'll bring this back
Mm.
to the American later in the pod.
Yeah.
I think in those cases, in Washington's extreme, and I don't see any value there because it's really a guess. But when you've got fewer variables, you can probably find some value in your season win totals. But I think that how the market kind of splits the difference when it comes to your conference champs bets, there's a path there, but there's a lot more upside. It's the inverse of that downside risk that you just mentioned. It seems, and I bring again SMU because if fair, and it seems, I think what are they when we did ours? They were like 16 to 1 to win
They're
the
still in that range.
That's value that I have to grab just because it seems like the market didn't really split the difference effectively or efficiently, if that sounds right.
Mhm. Yeah. SMU is a
Okay.
team I'm also high on, and you can just like rattling off a few other teams like UCF, where there is some new faces and new characters, but there's talent coming in and there's upside that maybe like a win total market doesn't necessarily capture all the upside the
Exactly.
better think there is. There actually is even higher upside. There's to make the
Yep.
conference championship game, to in some cases go to the college football playoff. I see what you're saying, and I agree in the SMU case especially because yes, there is downside risk. So why pay or get plus 130 on your odds for the upside, whereas actually you could go all the way up and it's 18 to 1 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Also, just selfishly, I see a little bit of that with USC in that they had a total overhaul on defense, and it just seems
Mm.
like the market's saying, "Yeah, prove it," and just okay. There's a good defensive staff now, and it works. Are they likely to make the Big Ten title game? No, but at 22 to 1 or 16 to 1, there's worse shots in the world than that. I see them all over the place. So,
Yeah, I would say also, I think maybe the market is saying this team changing leagues may
yep,
struggle more. We saw a few of the Big
yep,
12 teams coming from the AAC struggle in their first year. So maybe that's where maybe it's pricing down that negative downside. And maybe that's where the better, can maybe you're trying to buy into that upside, but maybe this is why the market's saying that.
yep. Cannot disagree. All right. So we'll come back to this concept a little later in the pod. Little overview of the conference before we get into teams. We will look at our predictions from last season, and then next year we will revisit what Reed did, and hopefully he does better than what Robert and I did. Boy, I had misguided faith in Temple. EJ Warner really disappointed me. And we both were high on FAU, and that Casey Thompson experiment did not take, and we'll get back to that in a second. I had Tulane in the conference game. Robert had SMU, so we got that. Not really anything outstanding there. Help us do better this year, please, Reed.
I'll try my best.
All right. And this is our glossary. Just you're going to see a lot of terms that are referred to. Just take a picture of this now, drop it in your Sharpest College Football Podcast notebook, and refer back to it throughout this and other podcasts over the year. So here's my overview of the conference. Interestingly, I actually had the American rated as the weakest conference in all of FBS last season. Do you rate conferences?
I wouldn't say I rate them specifically, but I will say that I do have an eye on a band of teams. I could probably put together something very quickly, but
Yeah.
I rate every team individually. And then obviously I
Okay.
filter out through conference. So if I were to create something, maybe it's like the composite, like net score of all the teams and then inverse
Exactly.
order. I
Yep.
would say, off the top of my head, I would say Conference USA is definitely the worst.
Oh no.
I would
You're
say Conference USA is probably the worst off the top of my head. And then where else is there? Mountain West, AAC. Those two are probably pretty similar. Sun Belt might be down this year. And then what's the other G5? Why am I drawing a blank?
the MAC.
And then, the MAC is. I'd still go Conference USA, MAC, and then American and Mountain West probably are
Wow.
in another tier above.
Oh boy. See, and I guess I've got my power ratings. I've got a bunch of really bad teams here at the bottom. ECU, Charlotte, Army, Tulsa, and Temple. And this is based on last year's, not projections. These guys are really drawing the average down quite a bit. A little overview thing, as we talked about, SMU leaves the American, goes to the ACC. They add Army. That'll be interesting. Probably one of the reasons I have them so rated so lowly last season is when I'm looking at the power rating of their offenses last season, nobody was green. Nobody was in the top one standard deviation above average in this conference last year in terms of offense. The best one was, but still here, is Memphis. Okay, but
Mm.
not great. Only one green defense, too. That was Tulane. Not a lot of horsepower that seems to be left in this conference. Other thing that's interesting, too, is I have a luck metric. And when you have a number that's in red, it's basically significant luck that you can expect regression. So two of the top three teams from last year basically had luck of 2.1 wins. That tends to regress, especially you see that really good luck correspond to good quarterback play. And with Tulane losing their quarterback, I'm interested to see how that plays out. And
Mm.
conversely, whether Memphis can continue their good luck with Hennigan coming back. Globally, any kind of impressions of the American?
Yeah, I think the American's a really interesting conference going through transition. Obviously, losing the champion in SMU to the AAC or to the ACC, sorry, from the AAC. So, at least me, how I like to look at this macro is the conference odds, right? What are the buckets of the teams and how is this all structured? So, you have, in my opinion, it looks like Memphis is pretty clearly the favorite in this conference. They are priced as such, talent wise. You would agree with that. And then there's a bucket of three teams: Tulane, who has a new coach; UTSA, who has a new quarterback; and
Mm-hmm.
South Florida, who I believe is the darling of the conference. And then you have two teams priced in the middle that I think are, I would call the very obvious dark horses in
Yes.
East Carolina and Rice. And then there's a big drop off to the middle bottom of the conference. So I think it's interesting how certain people maybe assess those six teams. Not that they all need six to be in that exact order, but to me, there's questions about all those teams. And
Yeah.
if you could find the answer to those questions the fastest, you might be onto something in this conference.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't know. I think a lot of it just comes down to one's opinion of Memphis to start with. And with that, I think we will start with Memphis, the Memphis Tigers. As I noted, extreme luck last season. If you keep a good quarterback, that your chances are better of replicating that than if you change your quarterback. First thing is Ryan Silverfield, no conference title game appearances in 4 seasons. That's an issue. Seth Hennigan, 112 Apex. That's nice. A little better than pat on the head. In career starts 25 to 37, I want to see a little more for as much pub as he's getting. He's getting the pub to me of an Apex 120, 125 guy. You watch him and it's there, but maybe I'm not seeing his worst moments, or maybe I don't know. That's the kind of thing that I zero in on when I look at a team like Memphis that's the favorite. They do return the second most Ryan in the conference, that actually it's way above average in all of FBS. One issue that I have here is their defense kind of stunk last season. They're bad against both the run and the pass, and
Mhm.
there's not a really good improvement metric here. So I don't see their defense really improving. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that once I throw it to you.
Yeah.
Talked about their luck. The game I have on their calendar, this game at South Florida, we'll talk about that in a second. Not playing the season win total of 9. I've got enough questions here between the defense and Hennigan being. I think the market is pricing Hennigan as exceptional, and I would characterize him more as nice.
Mhm.
I'm not looking at the plus 220 as a dead money in the pool, but I'm looking at it as money that I definitely want to fade. What do you think?
So I would say Memphis, first of all, Ryan Silverfield. This feels like a hot seat season if this doesn't go the way Memphis is starting to build their roster, because I think we can agree this is the most talented roster. Just straight up on paper, this team should be the best in the AAC. Like you meant, and Memphis has been amongst the top bucket of teams in Ryan Silver every year. Ryan Silverfield's tenure. This is a program that invests in their team. They have a fourth, fifth year quarterback in Seth Hennigan now. I would say last year he's I would say he's a Jag plus. He's above a game manager. I wouldn't say I love him, but I think he is very talented. You look at last year, pretty solid, especially in the short to intermediate passes. Completed 78% of his passes short, 58% medium, which is 10 to 19 yards. And then his deep ball, 35% completion percentage, 22 big time throws to 6 turnover worthy plays. That's decent. So Memphis, they have a really good passing game. I agree with you, though. The defense was a big problem for me last year. I believe they graded out bottom 10 in terms of tackling grade per Pro Football Focus. I would argue they were the second worst behind USC or ahead of USC in terms of tackling. Memphis really an undisciplined defense. I see why they're the favorite. They have some transfers coming in from the likes of Tennessee. That's like a lot of talent and fusion here and a really exciting offense. But I agree. Like, do you trust them as the favorite? If this team was 7-1, 6-1, you're more interested because there's a lot of upside here. Then
Yeah.
you look at the schedule's tough to back the short shot in the conference because we're just talking about the top 6 teams.
Yep.
They play 4 of the other 5,
Yep.
and 3 of those are on the road with second, third, fourth choice. Or I'm sorry, Tulane is at home. I'm sorry. So 2 of the 3 are at home or on the road. Sorry.
Yep.
So there's a lot of challenging games here and a lot of pressure on Memphis. I just don't know if I like trusting Ryan Silverfield, who I don't find is a very good coach. I don't know if I trust him as the
No.
short shot in this conference. So I would say I, I see why it's not like I'm betting their win total under because the talent's there, but it's a team that I'm wary of trusting, and we'll see how it goes this season. I'm definitely eyeing another team in the conference.
Yeah, and you seem to be a lot more plugged into transfers than I don't know. Pretty much everybody's more plugged into transfers than I am. I get them if they basically are good receivers or they're the starting quarterback. They might pop up here if they basically have experience on the offensive line. I don't. It's hard to detect that in defense. So, any names on defense that you think are reason to think that they might be better?
Yeah, they have some guys coming out, but they bring in Javon Dennis on the defensive line. He's a havoc wrecker, and then also Herring from Tennessee. He was the aforementioned
Okay.
defensive playmaker. He'll be definitely leaned on quite a bit to pick up some of the slack for. This is again a linebacker core that was pretty poor last year. This Memphis defense. It says in your numbers, it says on my numbers, my eyes, your eyes. This was a pretty poor defense. So there are some guys coming in. Again, Memphis invests. They have a pretty good like NIL situation. So the offense is going to be good to rock. It's if the defense can really pick up the slack for them to be that G5 college football playoff contender.
Yeah, and yeah, the other thing too is that at South Florida, boy, if your defense not proper in that game, that could be a long one.
Got a bad draw for conference schedule.
Yeah, it's like the league office didn't get the memo. Hey, do your best teams a solid here. All right, Tulane. A new head coach, John Summerall, replaces Willie Fritz, who went on to Houston. Summerall, 23-4 and 2 Sun Belt titles in 2 seasons at Troy. Good coach. Very good coach. But you got turnover in the head coaching position. You have Ty Thompson, who was like forever the quarterback of the future at Oregon. And now he's replacing Michael Pratt. Experienced offensive line, a lot of green in here in these metrics, which is a good sign. They lose a lot of Ryan, though. So I wouldn't say they're starting over, but that's a big drop in terms of the receiving yards that they're losing.
Mm-hmm.
They should have the best defense in the American. If I go by the numbers, the players are better than I, but if I look at, they were a really good defense last season. Experience, a lot of guys that will be in their prime this year. They have an excellent defensive coach. Summerall was like a linebacker. I'm going to confuse him with Womack. Where was he before he was at Troy? I apologize. Do
No,
you remember?
John Summerall comes from.
He's from Kentucky. He was the linebackers coach
Yes,
at Kentucky.
he was a co-DC and linebackers coach at
Yeah.
Kentucky and
Okay.
in Troy for 3 years.
Yeah. All right. So proven entity on defense. Very lucky team. You had a good coach that you're losing. And again, Summerall's a good coach too, but just you had a good coach and a good QB combo. I get a little nervous when I see a very lucky team in that situation. Market's got them way down to 7.5 wins. Now, when I say market, let me take a step back here. Hopefully, it doesn't hurt your feelings. You don't have any friends that work for DraftKings.
Nah.
I'll say it sarcastically. The geniuses at DraftKings posted a very conservative number. I'm going to be very generous here. And they're getting crushed. Overs at minus 150 now. Plus 350 for the American title seems light. Really reading some tarot cards here. Maybe is that saying that this game against Louisiana is a little tougher? And there's the market seeing that as a coin flip. I actually fell in love in Louisiana and was prepping for the Sun Belt preview. This is a tough way. This is a tough stretch right here. Kansas State, Oklahoma, Louisiana, South Florida. You can go 1-4 there really quickly. And maybe that's why that 7.5, they posted it. I don't know. I've just got a lot of crosswinds here. I've got some reasons to back and reasons to really be concerned. That 350 is really short for me with all these questions here. What are your feelings?
So I agree. If you like Tulane, I would steer you towards the American Championship odds rather than the win total because Yeah, there's a chance they lose 3 non-conference games to Kansas State, at Oklahoma, and at Louisiana. That being said, the conference schedule is pretty manageable, I would say. The toughest game's coming home. I still give credence to that defense that returns a lot. And also, Willie Fritz hired last year Troy's DC.
Oh, I didn't know
So,
that.
yes. And then he now left. So, John Summerall, it's a new DC, but also from Troy. So, I believe that it's not as much, it's part of the same family. Yeah,
Good
it was
info.
almost as if
Yeah.
this was like almost a succession plan without announcing it. So, I like the coach. I think we could argue John Summerall comes in here. I think you could argue he's already the best coach in the conference, given his track record. They got a proven DC. They have a lot of returning production on defense. And the offense, there's questions, especially at receiver, but they have their running back, Mac Hughes, who was an 1,000-yard rusher last year. And at quarterback, Kai Orton's back, the backup last year, who played a little bit when Michael Pratt had the concussion. Maybe he ends up taking the job from Ty Thompson because Ty Thompson never clicks. At least they get to find out in non-con what's working and what's not. Like they could get their guy before they start AAC play, which I like. Again, if Tulane's
Yeah.
1-3 going into that South Florida game, I don't care. Yeah, I'm not betting their win total. I think conference-wise, though, there's enough of a runway here to lean back on the defense, and there's enough mix of talent and veteran experience at quarterback. And I like the coaching staff. I still
Hmm.
like this Tulane team. I still think they're pretty reliable, all things considered. That luck metric is definitely a little scary. I thought that they were pretty lucky to get to the AAC championship game last year. That being said, I find myself liking this team. I was able to find a slightly better number than plus 350, but I do think if you're trying to play Tulane, I would say American Championship is your best bet. And
Wow.
listen, yeah, that Memphis game, both teams get a bye, but don't sleep on that one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's at Tulane. I know the other side also had at Memphis was home, but I'm pretty sure it's at New Orleans. That game might decide who goes. Very interesting to see. Both teams will be coming off of a bye in that one, but I think this team has enough, and I like them the most of the top choices to still take them to win the American.
Wow. You're bolder than I am. I just maybe Kai Williams just if he does get it. I just the Ty Thompson thing, like I said, is he was the quarterback of the future forever, and as you
Yep,
said, never clicked. And maybe the old drop in class, as we say in horse racing, gets it done here.
it's
But
possible.
yeah, that angle has worked, and it sometimes doesn't work. I'm before we move on. If you're a G5 fan, this game at Louisiana, I'm just imagining the Cajun fans. They have got to be dying for that game at home. That's going to be like I just think a sneaky, super hostile place.
Yeah,
I yeah that and that'll probably be on some channel that we don't get, unfortunately.
I'm hoping ESPNU. Fingers crossed.
That would be great. That would be a great call. Yeah, I that's just the if you're G5 fan, that's the kind of game you gotta love.
Yeah,
All right, I'm still undecided. I'll just put it that way. We're two teams in terms of who I like, and I want to pick your brain when we get a little further here. Here's a team that I've got some. I think I've got more questions than most about. I'll put it that way. Trailer does an awesome job there. Awesome job. When you're moving up from CUSA to the American, very good showing in year one. I thought it'd be more challenging, and it helped that they had Frank Harris to lead the way. The I'm trying to unsort the whole what happened to Frank Trailer last year and what can we learn from this year. They have new quarterback Owen McCown. He started 5 games, mostly Colorado. He started one for this team last season. Apex at 80. It's early, not the best showing. The thing that really concerns me, if you look at this Frank Harris Apex by season, okay, his first season, his OC was Barry Lunny. Freshman, whatever, I can get past that. He had 2 really good seasons under Lunny, who's now at Illinois, and then Will Stein, who's now just drawing up all kinds of crazy plays at Oregon and running circles around everybody. Then they get this guy Justin Burke, and I don't want to crap on Mr. Burke here, but he actually took over play calling for the bowl game in 22, and they stunk. I think they actually played Troy in that bowl game, and they scored maybe like 9 points. And Frank Harris takes a big step back last season. Now, some people say he might have been injured for a lot of the season. I
yeah.
don't know. That's a big step back. I've got real questions about this OC. And now you've got a quarterback that really hasn't been prepped by awesome OCs to come into. That's a concern. Second highest rated defense last season should be good enough. They return enough. They're very experienced in the number of career starts here. They'll only have one road game in November, so that falls really nicely for them. I don't know how that happens. And they avoid Tulane, so the schedule sets up nicely for them. Season total of 8, sure. I don't really have interest in that. I've got questions, so I'm not going to play them on the champs of the conference. One angle, we'll come back to this. Just let me know what you think first, and we'll come back to my last bullet point then.
Yeah, I am out on UTSA this
There we
year
go.
for a lot of the questions that you stated. Frank Harris is one thing. What about Trey Moore on the defensive line? This is a guy who had, 14 sacks last year? Yeah, 14 sacks, 17 and a half tackles for losses. He's at Texas now. He's at the big school, UT. And every fall camp report is that he's like their best defensive lineman. So let's just talk. That is a seismic loss there. That is
That's a
easily your best pass
big
rusher
goal.
is no longer on the team, and your best player on offense is off the team. So I think that there's a lot of concern here for UTSA. I agree. I think that they were really Frank Harris uh, reliant last year. They lose their best player on both sides of the ball. I think that there's plenty of questions. I think that there's some serious downside here. I think that this was a team that overachieved last year. I remember watching. I wasn't super impressed. Granted, Frank Harris, he had an injury probably for most of the year. And this is a team without Frank Harris. They lost to Army at home outright. A
That's
bad
right.
Army team on a
Yeah.
Friday night. So I think that there's some serious concerns here. I would heavily lean towards the under. This, again, another reason why I like Tulane is because I have questions about the other teams in the conference, and UTSA, again, they're the third choice. I definitely see the floor happening a lot more than the ceiling.
It feels, just to jump to the Sun Belt for a second, it feels like kind of the word's out on Texas State.
Oh yeah, the word's
Yeah,
definitely out. If I talk one more podcast about Texas State, they might make me like the recruiting manager or something.
and I'm not going to say I move lines, but just for reference, when we did our futures pod, they were plus 550 on DraftKings to win the Sun Belt. Now DraftKings has them at plus 400.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's some serious heat. So if we say the word's out on Texas State, I don't know if this holds up, but I love this angle right here. Kennesaw State is going to be unbelievably bad. The very worst that you saw of Sam Houston last year would run circles around what Kennesaw State's going to be this year. They're just not ready. I was hoping that basically UTSA would look super strong in that game. They're going to be looking ahead to Texas, and we could just pummel them with Texas State at Texas State. Are you looking at lines there?
Yeah, I'm pulling up my numbers for Texas State at UTSA. That's in week 2. Yeah, I make Texas State a small favorite in the game, so I agree.
I would I don't know. I get aggressive in these times. I would give easily up to 5.5, maybe even a field goal more, and not even think twice about it. You just Texas State. It's just I think they're just in a very different spot, and I like Traylor, but Kenny ate up a lot of learning curve runway last year, and I think that they take a big step forward. Off a
Yeah,
night.
I make Texas State. I'm very bullish on Texas State, and I make them 5.5, closer to 6, honestly. So I agree. I imagine Texas State will be a small favorite in the game. Hopefully, less than 4.
Okay, so
Hopefully,
maybe there's a scenario there. Plus, like I said, UTSA could just easily be looking ahead to Texas because they're not listening to sharps like you and me about looking out for Texas State. One other thing, just to say, Traylor, one of the reasons he's so good, look at this. Lunny is a solid OC, and Will Stein is just great. This guy knows what he's doing. Just not every hire works out, though. All right. This is my price discovery play, and we'll come back to that in a second. So, South Florida. Alex Golish, 7-6 in his first season there. Overlooked is just how bad they were the 3 seasons before. 4-29. Congratulations on your 4 wins, Jeff Scott. Really proud of you. I want to be mean. Byron Brown, I really like him. 103 apex in your first 12 career starts is good. Boy, what I'm struggling with is I think that guys like you and I really love this guy, and I think he's really overlooked by nationally. I'm wondering if I'm a little bit too much in love for a guy that's a 103 apex. Now this guy can run too, and he's in an awesome system, so maybe he can just completely take off. I'm just trying to check myself, and not get too carried away here. They have the highest improvement metric on the offensive line, in the entire conference, which is beautiful. They return 98% of last year's Ryan this year. They had some transfers in, which helped. It just offensively, it just everything is set. Everything is set. I love it. Now, I don't know. The one thing I don't account for is running backs because I see them as interchangeable here. I see the offensive line as maybe more important than a specific running back that's not named like Reggie Bush or Adrian Peterson.
Yeah.
Defensively, not a surprise. They struggled last year. They kind of stunk before that, so whatever. They've got the highest returning starts and improvement metric defensively in the entire conference.
Mm-hmm.
This is one thing I'm going to bring in a different concept here. This is, I think, the one thing that I might be overthinking this, but there's probably some version of this that the market's kind of splitting the difference on. And that is, can Todd Orlando thrive under Golish? And it's not an Alex Golish, you stink thing. The analog I would bring in is the Phil Longo. You've got these crazy wide open offenses, and Phil Longo's defensive coordinators basically hate him because you don't practice against a tight end
Yeah.
and you just get punched in the mouth. And I don't know if it's that extreme, but you see that same dynamic to a degree with Lincoln Riley's defenses. They're just not tough enough. And maybe Orlando is a great guy because he loves to blitz and he's okay. We're not going to be tough. We're just going to just pressure the line of scrimmage. And if you pop big ones, that's great, but we're going to cause a lot of havoc in the meantime.
Yep.
That's the whole thing, I think, with this team. Can he just, and I don't think I see a lot of analogs to them in USC. They don't need to be a dominant defense. Just be good enough. Just be middle of the pack and you can get to the title game. You've got, this is just a crazy stretch right here. And it's after you play Miami too. At Tulane and Memphis. Now there's a bye in between, but that's the whole thing right there in terms of whether their season's going to work out. I think 650 is a little generous because I've got one variable here that I'm uncomfortable with, but I can see a path. And you've got two tough games here, Tulane and Memphis, but I see that I've got two shots basically to not punch my ticket, but be at least in the playoff after. In the playoff, this is the Masters. Yeah. I'm not the leader in the clubhouse, but I'm tending. And for a team that offensively should be starting from the word go, I like that. The 650 seems really generous to me. Am I too optimistic about the defense?
I agree with you in that the defense needs to go from crap to very bad. And this is defense. It was boom or bust, like you mentioned. They were top 10 in tackles for loss. They were also dead last in explosive pass defense. So again, if they weren't getting in the backfield, you're probably letting up touchdowns. But part of that falls in the philosophy in which Alex Golish wants to coach, because the offense wants to play at the fastest rate humanly possible. Your defense is going to be gassed. And that's what kind of concerns me about taking these type of teams to make serious runs or anything like that, because your defense can't get any stops. What if your offense isn't clicking? So I thought when I started my prep for the AAC, I would be in on South Florida, but the market I think is further in than I am because I liked them. But again, this is a team that they won 6 regular season games last year. They had a pretty good season. The jump already, or a jump happened already. The team was the surprise last year. And I liken this a little bit to Texas Tech last year. Texas Tech had a really strong season under first-year head coach Joey McGuire.
Yeah.
Last year happened. Their win total's up 3-4 games. Granted, injuries happen, some fluky losses happen, but that's what happens. Like, water finds their level quickly. So I actually played a 7.5. I played the under on that. 7 is obviously way different, so I'm not necessarily advising that. But I think that there is some concern with South Florida's schedule because, like you mentioned, they play at Alabama, home at Southern Miss, whatever, home Miami, then at Tulane. So they're going to be limping into that Tulane game at a pretty significant clip. I know you could make the same argument about Tulane has to play Kansas State, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, but at least Tulane's at home. It's a little bit different with the travel and everything. They get a bye before Memphis, and the schedule isn't too brutal, but there's just a lot of you're telling me South Florida goes from what was rated as arguably the worst team in the AAC last year to a bona fide contender where they won't slip at Charlotte in week 12, just for example, or something like that. This market is baking in a lot of respect for South Florida already. And I personally just don't love Todd Orlando as a coach, where can they climb another step? Absolutely. It would not shock me. It would probably be really entertaining along the way, but I land on, I have to fade. I just think that this is baking in a jump that's already happened a little too much.
That's totally fair. And one of the things about Orlando that I guess the other thing, not under Golish, it's such a tough read. His defense was really soft at USC, but that was Helton ran that like a country club. That was just a soft program all around. And if there's one of the places you cannot do that, it's basically two places: it's Texas and USC,
Yeah.
because the country club becomes really country club. So I get it. This is why I like to talk about these things with you and listen to your pod, because test my thesis. Maybe
My biggest thing though is, can Byron Brown become a better passer? Because there's all he can run. The guy plays like basketball out there. He's huge. He's 6'4", like 230 or something. But if you look at the numbers, so South Florida, really quick, I won't ramble too long on this,
no,
but
go ahead.
so the offensive line was really bad last year. They ranked outside the top 100 in sacks allowed because Brown was a loose cannon out there. They scored 30 points a game, but I think we could throw that out because that's a very pace dependent.
Yep.
If you look at it though, EPA per play, 67. So that's right at the national average. They were 13th in explosive rush rate, 75th in explosive pass rate. Like when you look at it, they took so many negative plays. If Brown could clean that up, that would make the offense look obviously a lot sharper, stay on schedule. Because
Yeah.
when they got to third and long, that was it for them because Brown's not a reliable deep passer. So that's really where my concern is. If Brown takes in that step, yes, I agree. The ceiling is AAC championship, but how many times that ceiling hit relative to what happened last year?
Yep. Very fair. Very fair. All right. Let me. We go to. Oh boy. Yeah. You need to do some explaining on this because I'm not getting it at all. The Rice Owls. Now, God bless Mike Bloomgren. He actually, I guess we could say, backed them into a bowl last year. But good for
Yes.
them. They go to class. They study. Nice school. Rated higher than my school. So congratulations, Rice. Um, the first thing, just my first bullet point here. The offense improved 5 points last season, but that's got to be, I don't know, 99% due to having a really good quarterback in JT Daniels. He didn't set Georgia and West Virginia on fire, but going to the American, that's that drop in class we talked about. I am really concerned about EJ Warner coming in. I drank the Kool-Aid after his freshman season. He had a great second half of his freshman season. He stunk last season, and I don't know
Mm.
Temple well enough to know, was that Warner? Was that the program? Was it? I don't know. Did they lose a bunch of other talent? But man, they really disappointed last season. Temple did. This is a concern too. Bloomgren he's the offensive coordinator, I think, at Stanford, but he's an old offensive line coach. I don't like that they were 12th in running game. That's that GGAB metric right here. 12th
Mm.
in a conference of 14. Now, I'm sure part of that was taking a step up in class from the Conference USA to the American, but boy, that's a concern, especially when you're losing your quarterback. They added no receiving yards of any note through the portal. That's a problem. Defense was bad last year. They have a very low improvement metric. That's going to be a problem. And then I see this over 6.5, and the over is getting crushed.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they're in that second tier. I don't see them favored in more than 6 games. My compass is maybe broken on here. What am I missing?
So I think a lot of the love for Rice comes from their returning production. They return I, like 19 of 22 starters. They have the highest returning production metric on defense in the entire country. They return like 84% of snaps from last year. So I think that is where the love comes from. Listen, I am willing. I sipped the EJ Warner Kool-Aid last year. I'm willing to give him another shot because Temple, they are awful. They are so bad. And you look at what happened when he got hurt last year and he was out. They could not get a first down. So I'm willing to give EJ Warner a mulligan. They lose Luke McCaffrey to the NFL. He's their number one receiver from last year. They do bring back their next two receivers, which I think maybe it's like the Moneyball line, right? We can't create Giambi, but let's like recreate him with three guys. So that's Luke McCaffrey. I don't know if they could create Luke McCaffrey again, but I think that they can maybe make him with two or three guys. They bring back their lead running back, Dean Connors. He rushed for over 6 yards. So I think that the pieces are there for an offense that's been pretty solid now under Bloomgren a little bit now through much of his tenure. And the defense, the secondary is pretty good. And this is a pass happy conference. This defense was top 30 in EPA per pass last year. So I see the love. Maybe it's a lot of preseason priors that are baking in the returning production that
Hmm.
maybe give them a little bit too much of a boost. When I went through my stuff, because I like to do my research before I look at the win totals, unless there's some like really like key in, like I scan through them if anything really jumps out, but I didn't Rice didn't make the cut there. So if Rice was 5.5, for sure over. Obviously, the market knows that they're way higher at 6.5. I'm good. But I do think that this team, there is another level, I think, for this to go. And I don't know if the drop off from JT Daniels to EJ Warner is as big as possible. Because 2 years ago, when EJ Warner came in, there were some flashes there of some really
Yeah.
exciting plays. So I think that I don't know if they could get to 7 wins. Like at Houston, that's a team they beat last year. At UConn, I think they could definitely win. The non-con's pretty favorable for them. Can you flip a few road games at Army? Can you get that at UAB? Like they might be more reliable than UAB. I think Rice is not one to overlook or pencil out like win or loss. I think they're firmly in the upper middle of this conference.
Wow. Okay. And this is not saying my look. If I hit 58%, I'm a freaking genius during the season, right? We're gonna be wrong on a lot of stuff and still be happy with it. And this is when we're just you mentioned EPA, and EPA is a super valid measure. I have them defensively apex at a 116, which is pretty that's rough. You're basically making everybody look like Seth Hennigan, basically. But that's one way to slice the pie. So
So
I
for what it's worth, I'm Rice 6.8 wins.
really
So
okay.
I lean towards the over, but I wouldn't say it's I'm like way off from this. If it was six flat, I may be more interested, but I think that this is a pretty good 6.5 shade towards the over.
Okay. I won't play it then. Next, this if there's one specific reason I wanted you on this podcast specific to this conference, when you were kind enough to have me on your pod in week 5 or 6 or whatever, you made a passing comment. And I don't know if you remember you saying this. You said something like, we're Trent Dilfer truthers on this pod, or believers, or something like that. And I didn't want to say anything because I crapped all over them preseason. The Dilfer hire was interesting. I'll just put it that way. The process, the coordinators just blew my mind. Blew my mind. Alex Mortensen, God bless him. And then who I think his most relevant experience before was like being a running backs coach in FCS or maybe even Division Two. And his defensive coordinator was his defensive coordinator in high school who like that was like the peak of his resume. I didn't get it. I cashed on the under 4.5, but it was tight. And
Yeah,
I
they were UAB was better than people gave them credit for. They were better than their record said.
here's where I come. Let's go back to here. This when I was prepping overall, I have them fourth in the conference from a power rating. And I've said I have questions about Tulane and UTSA and Memphis. Look who's next. It's UAB. So let me just I'd reduce the font size here. There's so much going on here. Okay, Trent Dilfer 4-8. Offensive rating third in the conference. That was with a new quarterback. New
Uh,
quarterback, 119 apex. That's better than Seth Hennigan. That's in his first year as a starter. They have a. I'm getting too excited here. They have a good improvement metric on the O line. It should be better this year. They added nothing through the portal on the receiving end. Okay, that might be a little bit of an issue. I don't know. Yeah, the defense was a big problem, and I don't know if it was the high school guy that's just in over his head. This is rough. They might be on year one on defense this year. When you have basically a lot of inexperience last year, and then I have a low improvement metric, a low experience metric. It almost seems like they just had guys on the roster. They said, fine, you can play this year, and we're done with you after that. And now they're starting over again. That's my biggest concern about this team. Now, they were also very unlucky despite all this. I guess to your point, like they're underrated. I'm preaching to the choir on this. Really weird dynamic here. And this is unique to them. Most teams don't play Army and Navy. Some do. They get them 2 weeks apart within 14 days. That's an advantage. You're preparing for the option and you're still fresh. After you prep for Navy, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And 2 weeks later at Army, I think that really helps them.
Bye before Navy too.
Okay, there you go. I think I have them favored in 8 games. I like this team, he said with surprise on his face. So I'm just going to ask, I'll throw it to you with this, because this is, you were saying you believed in Dilfer. I didn't. And now I just need you to tell me, can this staff succeed in the AC or the AAC?
Yeah, so put some context around the Trent Dilfer stand. They were an over cash cow. I think
Okay.
they went. I think they went 8-4, 9-3 to the over. Basically, the pod bet one of my bets every week was just UAB over whatever the
There you
number
go.
was. It didn't matter. They would just soar over because all they did was play shootouts last year. So that's the context around that. I thought that the number got a little crazy. I didn't bet anything on them. I don't even think I bet on them on the side in any game. Maybe it was just Tulane I bet them. But the market, though, is baking in this jump, right? Their win total 6.5. It was 4.5 last year. So the book's out that UAB is probably going to be a little bit better. That's where I get concerned, where, okay, there's a little bit of an expectation now for UAB to perform to a certain measure that would say they're definitely a bowl eligible team and they're a fringe contender for the conference title game. That's where I get a little concerned because, like you mentioned in your notes, this defense is still a huge concern. I think the offense is still going to cook, but is the defense going to make any sort of improvement? So that's where I get a little lost on how high is the ceiling really with UAB? And because again, like 4.5 win total, if a few bounces go a different way, UAB probably goes over. So Dilfer is a good enough coach to maybe not be a terrible team. But now the expectation is, can Trent Dilfer put together like a competitive roster? So that's where I get a little lost here. But yeah, I'm probably back on a Dilfer overs again because I don't see much different here with Jacob Zeno back. That guy was cooking last year.
Yeah. And to that point, I think you hit on three thoughts there I want to put together. And this is why I might be comfortable on the over here, especially if I'm getting plus money. They were unlucky. 2 games of bad luck last season. That takes you right there from 4 to 6 if that just regresses.
Yes.
Then I've got a quarterback that I love, 119 apex in career starts 1 through 11. Again, this isn't Seth Hennigan, career starts 25 to 30, whatever. Better apex in his first season as a starter in a brand new everything. New coach, new offense, new this, new that. I'm talking myself into maybe this might be what I think USF might be, just extreme version. It's just the worst defense. So if you're getting plus money on that 6.5, I mean, that 30 to 1 is not the worst bet in the world, just maybe like for $5.
The difference between UAB and USF are closer than the market would suggest.
Very well said. That's
yeah.
That's why you're a great podcaster and I'm a decent podcaster. I'm definitely and yeah, this is live like work study program here. I'm looking at UAB over here. I like that. Just and the thing is, yeah, they do get Tulane and Memphis. Okay, I don't know. I'm more bearish on Rice than most. Charlotte, I don't really like. Tulsa nor Connecticut. You have some thoughts on Tulsa. Louisiana Monroe is like sneaky, just absolutely horrible this season.
Again, with USF, just back to them, you play 2 of top 10 most talented teams in the country in Miami and Alabama. There's a chance that team, I know they're going to buy. That team might not be the same by the end of the season with some of those body blows. So there's a chance that, to me, that's why there's some downside risk to USF that isn't necessarily baked into the market.
All right. You switched me from one green and gold team to the other here. All right. Good stuff. I think I'm in no fear of being switched onto this team. That is the
this was my team last year, and I had egg all over my face.
Yeah, we bit from some of the same bad fruit last season. You were on. I remember. I heard your Mac preview. You were on Akron also.
Oh God,
DJ Irons. God bless you, kid. Man, you broke my heart.
That was brutal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we both. You saw. We both had them as in our title game as our upset picks in different games last season. Tom Herman went 4-8. Casey Thompson. I know he was playing hurt for a while before he actually just called it a season and a career.
He was banged up and then tore his ACL in week 3 or 4, so they were trying out backup like pretty much most of the year last year.
Yep. 40 apex that's just really bad. Again, it was a rebuild. His backup Daniel Richardson had a 61 apex. Now he's at FAMU. This is where it just not that there's a case to be made, but it really falls apart when Cam Thatcher comes in. He was so bad at Marshall.
Awful.
Okay. Didn't know if you're a Fancher family friend or something, but yeah, he was really bad. The team threw 15 interceptions. That's a problem. That's, to me, it's not just talent. It might just be that this offense is just above the heads I don't like that they're having to start out a quarterback with Fancher in that system where they turned it over so much last year. They're starting over again at offensive line. They had to start over last season. Defense should be a little bit better just because they were projected to be so bad and they were okay. I guess the kind of like my headline here is it seemed like Casey Thompson was a way to kind of short circuit year 1. And then that doesn't work. And now you're basically almost in year 1 or year 0 now. And they're basically just almost now starting the rebuild. And I don't know if I'm going to bet the under here. They seem like at the bottom of the lower middle class traffic jam, but this is not one I have no futures on this, but I can't see it being a good season for them. I just talk out loud. Just can they win 7 games even with a really easy schedule? I don't
That's
know.
my issue. The schedule keeps me off of the under.
Yeah.
It felt like they were a little snake bitten by injuries last year, but they definitely have some holes to plug, and I think the quarterback's a big issue. But I fired on quite a bit of win totals already this season, so this is one where if I squint, I could see them luck boxing a few wins, beating up on some bad competition because the talent level's high. Tom Herman tends to thrive when the expectation isn't super high. So maybe I was a year early on this team. Maybe we were both a year early on this team. But for me, just no touch here. I like if they suck, that wouldn't surprise me. For what it's worth, I bet against them in week one. I took Sparty 11. I think 11 and a half is still good. So I definitely don't like them game to game, but like season long, yeah, like I think they could be, put together an above 500 AAC record or something. If you look, they could easily be 4-1 at their first bye. They play
Yeah.
home Army, home FIU, at UConn, home Wagner. They are all those games are winnable. So all of a sudden you're 4-1 and you're scrambling the end of the year. They go, at North Texas. That game you can't say North Texas is for sure winning that one. At Temple, they're probably favored because Temple is one of the worst FBS teams. Home Charlotte at Tulsa, like those are coin flips. Like all of a sudden, teams 8-4. I'm not really interested. Maybe Cam Fancher needed a change of heart or a change of scenery, I should say. I remember Charles Huff said something about like his psyche was all messed up from playing so bad. Like Marshall fans were in his DM saying you suck. So maybe that's part of what aided his downfall with the Thundering Herd, but just no interest for me. I think there's some serious downside here. Just
Yeah.
not enough to play it.
Literally, yeah. I guess why I can't play either. You just said they could be 4-1 after 5. I would not be shocked if they were 2-3 either. And
Exactly.
right
Exactly.
there, yeah, there's just nothing
I
would shock.
wish the schedule was a little bit harder because then I'd be like, yeah,
Yeah,
let's get this under. And even if it's 5.5, I'd be like, yeah, this team is probably gonna be pretty bad. But they have one of the most favorable AAC schedules, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah. Just something, just a little more tests. Not even like tough games. Just something that a little more resistance. All right, North Texas Mean Green. Anyway, that defense, my God, come on. Now, doesn't surprise me. Eric Morris is an offensive guy. I need to have the Eric Morris discussion, I guess we would say. Um, Good at incarnate word. I'm going to say his experience at Washington State is a Rorschach test that you're going to get out of it what you want to see.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Cam Ward was a lot better not under Eric Morris. That's interesting to me. And I'm not here to crap on Eric Morris, but Cam Ward was better without him. He did not move the offense forward in his first year, and I think there were some pieces. He did get good play out of Chandler Rogers, and Chandler Rogers said, "Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Cal," which is interesting. Chandler Morris, another Rorschach guy. He actually beat out. I blanked on the name again. Come on, the
He
runner-up
took
for Heisman.
he was starting week one against Colorado when Max Duggan, the
Duggan.
TCU team, went to the national championship game. Chandler
Yeah,
Morris was chosen to be the week one starter. He got hurt in the first half.
yeah, and I maybe this is good. I don't know. The defense it was so bad. It took like a huge step back. And now maybe that's like you got an offensive guy. You're starting over, whatever. The over's getting a lot of play at 5.5. The non-conference South Alabama, who knows what they are? You've got 2 new coaches there, and then you've got Texas Tech and Stephen F. Austin. I just don't know if they actually traded up by getting Morris instead of Luttrell. Not that Luttrell was anything great, but this doesn't seem like they're going to. I don't know. Year one, I'm not going to conclude too much, but it's not like I'm looking at here and looking at this. I see a lot of signs in other programs like a Western Michigan and just a lot of pieces that Lance Taylor added, and I can see trajectories in the right direction. I see that maybe with Chandler Morris coming in, although you lost your best quarterback. You lost a good quarterback, one of the best in the American. I don't know if they're trading up with the coaches, and I can't back this team. I'm not going to fade them yet, especially with the Morris thing as a wild card. So I'm just going to wait and see on these guys. What about you?
Yeah, I wonder if Chandler Morris could maybe be one of those like step down in class guys and really thrive in a quarterback friendly offense. Don't have a strong opinion on the team, but I wonder if similar to like South Florida, the defense could not be crap, but pretty bad. Again, this is like arguably the worst FBS defense in the entire country. So if you go from 132nd to 110th or 100th, that's a pretty big jump. And I think the offense, I don't see much of a drop off here with Chandler Rogers to Chandler Morris. If Morris could stay on the field, I think that this offense is friendly enough that they can maybe make this happen. So I, I guess I'm a little bit more bullish. Not that I have a ton of betting ideas about this team so far. I'm curious about that week 1 game against
Yeah.
South Alabama on the road. They've been taking money. They went from 7.5 to 6.5. So I'm interested in maybe North Texas in week 1, but ultimately it's tough to trust this team with that type of philosophy. So I do like North Texas, but maybe not that much.
Two things. If you want to grab your dog, go ahead. It's
No, I'm good. I'm on mute for a second.
okay. Secondly, I guess the lesson is if you wear green uniforms and you're in the American, you just don't play defense. Apparently, that's the rule
Yeah,
here.
pretty much.
My gosh. Yeah, I wait and see here, I guess. That's what we'll say. I need some help on this one too.
I'm here to
There,
help.
yeah, please, because I don't know. I can see a narrative and a half here, but I'm not buying it. East Carolina, East Carolina won 2 games last season. They beat Gardner Webb and FAU. Jesus, this offense was so bad at passing, bad at running. We have a thing called the bum list where the top or the 10 lowest rated quarterbacks get a mention. Shout out to them. East Carolina was just pathologically on that list, I would say.
Mm.
It was embarrassing. Um, they were the worst offense in all of FBS by my ratings. They had the worst team apex. All right. Jake Garcia. What do we say? He has a power 4 pedigree. Okay. John David Baker from Ole Miss. He was a co-OC there. I don't know how much your co-OC is really calling plays or running stuff when you have Charlie Weiss Jr. and Lane Kiffin
Mm.
above you. That might just be a proximity play. The defense was actually not that bad, and they have a good improvement metric this year, so maybe their defense is a path to mediocrity this season. I think that if, and you said you had they're in the second tier in the conference favorites, right?
Yeah.
I
Mm.
just don't get it. That seems to me there's a lot of faith in Mike Houston baked into this. He was from JMU, right? I think he
Uh,
was.
I will tell you in a second. Mike Houston comes from, yeah, James Madison.
All right, so very successful there. But man, it was again. You can say it was a slow build at ECU. He was on the hot seat. Then Holton Ayers became like decent and kept him out
Mm.
of that. And it maybe it just comes down to the defense is enough and Jake Garcia is enough. But man, enough just doesn't entice me, and I don't see them anywhere near that second tier. They're starting from such a bad spot. What am I missing here?
So I don't think they're starting from as bad of a spot. The defense last year took a significant step forward, just pulling up some of their numbers on the Pirates defense last year. Listen, no qualms for me. That offense was awful. But the defense, sneaky, this team was top 50 in EPA per play. Defensive line was nasty last year. Had 84 tackles for loss, top 18 in the country. Allowed nothing on the ground. They were one of the top 15 teams in the country in terms of
Yep.
EPA per rush. The defensive line was absolutely filthy. The offense just couldn't do anything. Among the worst in all of college football. So they go out and get John David Baker from Ole Miss. Again, maybe he didn't do much as the co-OC, but I will give him the benefit of the doubt that he's at least learned the right way to play the game in terms of high efficiency football at Ole Miss. He's at least learned from the right guys. They bring in Jake Garcia. They also bring in Caden Hauser from Michigan State, who
Hmm.
is capable, I would say. Play at the Big Ten. He's also dropping down in class. He has a little bit of playing time. I'm not going to say he's a world beater, but again, this is the AAC we're talking now. From what I read, it's pretty close between the two of them in camps. And look, you could anytime it's close between two quarterbacks, it's always, oh, that means that they're both good when probably means they're both bad. It depends what agenda I'm trying to push, either good or bad. We'll say for my sake, it's good that they're both in a healthy competition in training camp. And the offense could go only up, and the defense, again, this is a lights out unit. This is among the best in all of AAC play. They return ECU,
Yeah.
they return close to the national average in terms of returning production. So I think that even if it takes a step back, they're still going to be this isn't going to be a terrible unit. Then you go through the schedule, And how many challenging games are really on it? They avoid pretty much the whole top. Yes, they play App State and Liberty and non-con, but in terms of just conference,
Yeah.
of those top teams, they only play UTSA and it's at home. So I think
Yeah.
that there's
Okay.
some margin here where
Yeah.
usually if you're looking for some upside case and we're talking about like that price discovery guessing type metric, yeah, a new OC that comes from a really highly touted program down a conference. You have some power now for quarterback pedigree. You have a coach that has proven he can build up a program and has a tendency to win. You look at this guy's coaching national championship at the FCS level. There's a lot of ingredients here where this team could get over. Again, market's moved a lot. I'm on a different number than is currently listed in terms of their win total. But I think there's a lot of avenues where this team could be impressive and I think really contend in the AAC. A lot of it also driven by the schedule being pretty easy.
Interesting. Boy, I'm going to maybe one up you here in a sudden change of direction and enthusiasm. You said they're above average in returning production. They on defense, they are way above average in terms of how many of those were first time starters last year.
That's
So
why it was a young team last year, completely
yeah,
bottomed out.
and I had forgotten that Houston's actually a defensive guy, and that gives me comfort when his side of the ball is doing well.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel good about the program. Not a fade for me. Maybe that Old Dominion game is an underplay.
It's possible. Old
Yeah,
Dominion's
well,
gonna be terrible this year.
any of those first three, yeah, that'll be
Keep an
interesting.
eye on Liberty at home. Keep an eye on that spot. Liberty is not as good as they were last year. If that ECU offense looks the part early on, Liberty's in trouble when they go to what do they call it? The Pirates something or another. I don't know. But when they go to Greenville, they're in trouble.
Interesting. Yeah, Liberty lost like a big receiver, right? That's the big loss that they
Yeah,
took.
is that LSU now? They have the quarterback and running back, but there's that team is worse than they were last year.
Okay, interesting. Is Caden Hauser, by the way, is he like one of those like Hausers that just like dominate Michigan? Is he the same Hauser?
No, it's spelled differently. OUSER, not
Ah,
AUSER.
okay. God, a lot of those people in my life. Hausers. All right, the rest of the American, I've just got like a sentence on each of them, and then we can go into more detail here as you like. Navy always just when unless you're returning just a boatload, which they're not this year. It's just a
Mhm.
how much do you believe in whatever in the scheme. I
Yeah,
don't really like this coach compared to Ken. I'm also interested to see how much. So I think there's three teams that play both Army and Navy. I'm curious how much that diminishes that option advantage that they have because it's so unique.
possible.
Yeah, just so that's it for me. Anything? And what are your thoughts on Navy, if anything?
So I've seen a lot of bullishness for them in the market. I'm not as sold because I don't think that the talent is there, but they did hire Mercer's offensive coordinator who ran like a wing T type scheme, like
Oh,
kind of triple
nice.
option fundamentals, but a little bit different. And it was very successful with the FCS ranks. Again, some people are betting some higher outcomes. I'm not bullish because it's still the same quarterbacks that I don't think are very good. Defense should be good. So listen, Navy's always live to pounce on a few teams, catch a few teams sleeping, but I still think it's going to take another year. This is a team that's been searching for real quarterback play since Malcolm Perry left, and I think they're still waiting for that guy to emerge.
That's good info on the offensive coordinator. In that, if they're going to pass the ball more, the defense, because I think this really bites them in the butt sometimes, where they just don't practice against competent
Yeah.
passing defenses, and it's just like, okay, let's throw on you guys. Good info though. I appreciate that. Charlotte, all right, they made some news with Biff Poggi and his act. I hope
Mm-hmm.
he's successful. They're starting over again at quarterback. They lost Reynolds after the 22 season. I don't remember who their quarterback was last season, but oh
Uh, Xavier something or another,
yeah,
someone bad.
truly not memorable.
Yeah.
they get a backup for somebody on the depth chart from Florida. They're starting over on the offensive line again. Really starting over on the offensive line. These are grim numbers, and they were grim last year. So this looks like a year
Yeah.
zero. I like that Poggi's. I don't know what kind of options he had in terms of just trying to bring in new guys, but I like just taking your medicine and building over from scratch on the offensive line. That's what you have to do. I don't really have anything more than this, like for this year. Any interesting angles or info on Charlotte?
Yeah, I personally like the Max Brown the Max Brown transfer from Florida. He was the backup last year. He ended up playing in I think it was the FSU game. He's transferring down, obviously. I think that may be a better setting for him. Look, Charlotte, again, they're starting from scratch. So I like what Biff Poggi's doing, where he's just raiding the portal and hoping it all clicks. Look, is it going to be successful? Probably not. You're at Charlotte, but I like the enthusiasm that you're trying to raid the portal, try and build this program up, and hope a few guys stick. I will say that I like them in week one against James Madison because they have talent on this roster. And I don't think we can accurately assess what James Madison's going to be under
Mhm.
Chesney just yet.
Yeah,
So Charlotte, it's a big number.
yeah.
Charlotte played incredibly slow last year, and they didn't have quarterback play. They could not throw a forward pass. I've seen Max Brown throw a forward pass, so I'm a little bit more bullish. That offense could at least be half decent. At least be able to run M pass as opposed to just run the ball. So keep an eye on Charlotte as a live underdog, anything over a touchdown.
I like that.
Because
The other
there's talent. There is talent on the roster. He's doing a good job of getting the right guys and it all come together.
interesting thing too about that game specifically is that Chesney, when I was looking over the Phil Steele two deep, he's got a lot of Patriot League guys, which I think that could be a real issue in the Sun Belt. I love Chesney, awesome resume, but I don't know if he's really properly gauging what's going to play in the Sun Belt, and maybe he's just starting a little bit behind where Poggi is, and maybe the talent's a little closer than we
That's what
think.
I'm saying. I
Wow.
will say, look, again, it's guys that fell off and they're now at Charlotte, but there are transfers coming in from that were recruited by Auburn, recruited from Miami, South Carolina, like 4 stars on the defensive line. Those are big boys.
Hmm.
So that I wonder if we see something crazy happen there.
Interesting. All right. Good info. Army, first year in this conference, I was really interested in because I saw this really at play when you had some of those teams move into the Big 12 for their first season. They just had a totally different caliber of opponent. So
Mm.
I just wanted to see what was the median. Mean can get blown up by an extreme. I said, what was the median power ranking of their opponent last year versus the ones on this year's schedule? The same, which is surprising. They actually had 3 FCS teams last year. I think they only get one, maybe two this season, but not
Mm.
really a step up in the quality of opponent overall. They might be better. Who knows how they play in the American? I have no idea. They're always just when Munkin was first ascendant, you could see it in just they had you put it this way. Service academies rarely have a lot of returning talent unless you have that weird thing that Troy Calhoun did where kind of
Mm.
everybody took a year off. He had one season when he was ascendant where he had a lot of returning experience and it made sense. And that was when they made a bowl for the first time since forever. But since then, they've been good, but just tough to gauge and bet on. So I just am just in pure wait and see. Just you got your usual Army variables, then a new conference variables. I'm just watching.
Yeah, Army with their quarterback Daly. No, thank you. I had their under last year and they squeaked to it. I had under 6. They somehow got to 6 at the end of the year. So this team is bad. Not interested in playing them really. I have nothing too exciting to say about it. The Black Knights.
Okay. You said you have some thoughts on Tulsa. I wonder if we're on different ends of this trade. Not that I'm trading him. Kevin Wilson, just I think it was runner up. He didn't quite win Humanitarian of the Year for a few years
Mm.
now. Huge step back for the defense, which is a concern. Okay, there's year one issues, whatever. That's a concern when your offense takes a 3.5 point step back and
Mm.
your head coach is an offensive guy. I see a complete rebuild on the offensive line here. This is a
Yep.
lot of red. This defense was horrible. And guess what? They're starting over again. As I talk about it, this looks like, I don't know what the number is, but it looks like it's going to be a really bad team. Are they bringing in a bunch of transfers that I'm just not seeing, or you think they're going to be horrible too?
So I think they can be decent. So
Wow.
I played their under last year, 4.5, and I needed to really squeak that one home. They landed on 4. They got to 4 pretty early, and I think they lost
Yeah.
like the last 4 or 5 games. They were snake bitten by injuries at quarterback between Braylon Braxton, Williams, Kirk Francis. They bring back a few of those guys, and they bring in Cooper Legoff from Utah State, who's very experienced. It was a whole new coaching staff last year. Steve
Mhm.
Spurrier Jr. is the OC. Kevin Wilson, he was the
That's
former
right.
OC at Ohio State. They were top 25 in explosive pass rate, despite having all these new quarterbacks in. So if they're able to get a little bit more injury luck, and I tend to think those find its level year over
Yeah.
year, maybe every 2 years, those things tend to regress to the mean. You can only be snake bitten for so long. So that gives me a little bit of confidence that this offense actually has a place, right? And it has something cooking. And the defense, yes, it was very bad. It's probably gonna be very bad again. But you look at the schedule. If the offense can cook, there's enough winnable games along the lines here where I like the over. And I think if the defense in year one was awful, it's probably going to take it. It can't get worse. So it's going to either be the same or it's going to take a step forward. And then the offense can be a little bit more sturdy and a little bit more
Mhm.
reliable, not just explosive pass heavy. How isn't this team going to be slightly more improved? How isn't this team going to take at least a small step forward? So this one, I actually found myself on the over. You go
Wow.
through the schedule. Yeah. So you go through the schedule. They have three home games where I have them favored in, or at least a coin flip game in Northwestern State, Army, and Florida Atlantic the last game of the year. That helps. It's the last game of the year at home. They also play at Louisiana Tech, who I think is going to be awful. They play at North Texas, where that's going to be a coin flip. They get a bye before they go to Temple, who knows what they're at.
Yeah.
And then at UAB, probably not. And so I think Tulsa, there's enough winnable games on the schedule for them to get to 5 wins, in my opinion.
Wow. As you, who is the, so I, sorry, I don't remember the name here. I've got somebody had 2 starts last year. Apex and 110 in those 2 starts at quarterback.
I
It's
probably
not.
Carnell Williams. He cooked against Temple on a Thursday night game, so it's probably him.
Oh,
I think that this offense has a decently high ceiling.
maybe a team to watch for overplays, then it sounds like, yes?
Yeah, I think that this offense with Spurrier and Wilson might be again a little underrated in the market. So that's why I look at this number. It's the same as last year, and they're probably better than their win loss record last year. So that's why that kind of I found myself there. But that's more like kind of me stumbling onto it just because I bet it last year more than anything.
And you ran the numbers on them, but not some of these other teams. You went through the whole season win total exercise for them, but not some of those other teams that we
This is
could.
what I bet. This is what I bet, so I know it a little bit further off the top of my
Yeah.
head. But I project Tulsa at 5.1. So
Okay.
I'm making it a little bit of improvement. So this is one where my numbers like it. I flagged it for this season anyway. So yeah, I'm pretty high. I say I'm fairly high on Tulsa. Maybe like the only guy in America.
Okay. If it happens, you will get all the props in the world from me. All right. Last team in more than one way, Temple. Boy, big step back. And maybe it wasn't a step back, just maybe they just came so far short of my expectations of them last season. I think that this might be one of those programs where I need to see proof of life in the
Yeah.
portal and NIL era, just like the maybe a lesser academically credentialed or reputationed version of Vandy in the
Yeah.
American.
No, this team is drawing dead. I have no interest really in anything here. I think Drayden's probably taking a new job or fired, I should say. This team is all out of sorts. I was on their over last year, and that blew up in my face so fast. So I out on Temple. All things Temple.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Glad to know I wasn't alone in that one too. I was
Yeah.
confident in that. We will wrap up with 3 questions for the American Conference. Let me take a note here. Since we keep track of these for the season. So, of the current American Conference head coaches, which one do you think will be the first to get a Power Four head coaching job?
So I'll go with John Summerall from Tulane. That would be. I think this might be
Yeah.
a quick stop for him on his way up the ladder. Because I also, again, makes sense. I'm bullish on them to go on a run here this year. So I think that could be a quick stop for him.
I agree. I think also that he has ties to Kentucky. The SEC people really like SEC people,
Mm-hmm.
and you get one of those interesting jobs that opens that's not top tier. I can see him really landing one of those pretty soon. One upset in this conference. Who you got?
So I was scrolling. I was looking because I wanted to go for one of the top teams, someone that could really get picked off. It's tough to obviously project before the season. At least this one I can potentially get out of the way early. So for mine, just want to get the right week. I like Navy over Memphis in
Oh
week
my God.
4.
Wow.
So yeah, we gotta go bold here. So Navy gets a bye before they play Memphis. Meanwhile, Memphis plays at Florida State the week before. And yeah, so they're at Florida State in week 3, and then they're back in Annapolis in week 4. So double travel spot for them. Last year, these two teams played. It was a crazy finish. Memphis had to rally at the end. They like ended up fumbling in their own end zone. They win by 7. It was a real back and forth game.
I
And
remember that. Yeah.
we spoke. It was a Thursday night game, and we spoke about Memphis. Their tackling is poor. I don't think that's just going to fix itself so fast. And if they're not going to be disciplined against the triple, and we saw last year pretty decent success for Navy in that game. I think the yardage was pretty similar. So I think Navy could be live in that game against Memphis, a team that really likes to play with their food and play down to some lesser competition. Yeah, I'll take Navy over Memphis in week 4.
Wow. I like your
Is that
process.
good for is that good for an upset?
Oh my God. It's bold. I like the logic though. I'm going to go with UAB over Tulane. Enough pieces there. A matchup of, Tulane, the one green team that actually plays defense. So how about that? Yeah, I'm still undecided here. Which two teams will play in the title game? And since we let the guest wrap up with this, I don't want to go chalk. You've got me thinking 2 or 3 times against South Florida. I'm gonna go South Florida and Tulane. You talked me into the whole Summerall angle.
All right. So should I go what like probably happens, or should I get like gutsy on this one? Should I like really put it out there?
You know what this podcast is all about? It's all about making me look smart. And if you want to
Okay.
look smart, then yeah.
Okay. So I'll do Tulane over ECU in the
Wow.
conference title game.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. So my initial play was going to be Tulane Memphis, but if I think Memphis is going to lose to Navy, and they have 3 tough road games. Give me ECU to pounce on. This always happens. Some of these teams get hot against a pretty soft schedule. Give me ECU to go on a little run here. Mike Houston finds something with this new OC. But definitely Tulane over ECU for sure. I think that the AACs are vulnerable enough at the top that we could get a kind of weird team in the conference title game.
Yeah, that's really my conclusion here. This is fluid, very fluid.
Yeah, the top is not as set as
Yeah,
someone would hit, and gotta push my own agenda. So give me the Pirates going on a little bit of a run here.
I like it. That is it. Thank you so much, Reed. I very much
Ah,
appreciate it. Unfortunately, Robert cannot be here to enjoy, but we will get his picks as well. And honest to God, if you like this podcast, you will love Reed's podcast. It is the perfect complement to this pod. Smart guy and smart guy. So thank you, Reed. Hang on for 1 second as I sign off here. Thank you, everybody else, for listening. And we will be back next week with the SEC. Until then, bye bye.